Good day, good afternoon to everyone. We welcome you to the public hearings on the Just Transition Mechanism. My name is Anabela Rosenberg from Climate Action Network International, CAN. I will make a brief announcement in English. Going back to Spanish, and on behalf of the organizing committee made up by Climate Action Network International, the Asian People's Movement for Debt and Development, APMDD, the Women and Gender Constituency, and the Youth Constituency at COP under the UNFCCC. We are very pleased to welcome our distinguished experts, the civil society panel, and all those who are joining us online to our session on the public hearings on Just Transition Mechanism. For the past few years, civil society has been actively engaging on just transition at global climate conferences, at COP, as it means to ensure that all aspects of climate action embrace the need for securing justice for workers, indigenous peoples and communities, and also support all countries in their efforts to find pathways for their people's prosperity. COP30 constituted a major landmark for advancing justice, equity, and rights through just transition. Governments have adopted a decision outlining key principles that must be taken into account when advancing just transition. And on top of that, and crucial to civil society demands, states committed to develop for decision in 2026 a just transition mechanism that will make all those principles and aspects be materialized. Our groups have outlined several demands regarding this mechanism, which we have called BAM, that now stands for the Belém-Antalya Mechanism for Just Transition. And as we prepare for the next round of negotiations, we wanted to hear from the experts themselves and practitioners that go well beyond our constituencies, their thoughts on how we can make the Just Transition Mechanism work. Also learn from past experiences and accelerate the good work that is happening on the ground. Instead of holding these conversations privately, we've decided to hold them publicly for the benefit of a much larger audience. In this session that will be starting soon, we'll have the honor to listen to two representatives from the Just Socioecological Office, Soledad, Huerta, and Fernando Krauss, that I will present now. And after the presentation, we will have an exchange with representatives from civil society that are here present. And we have Maggie Rochi representing the Women and Gender Collective, Camila Mercure from CFS and CAN, and also Marie Cosquet from Action Against Hunger. And they will be asking questions to our guest. I would like to present our presenters, Fernando Krauss from the Office of Socioecológica Just Transition of the Ministry of Environment from Chile. He's been involved in the research of issues related to governance and water and hydric conflicts, development of projects in rural areas on fresh water. He has vast experience on public management. He is a civil engineer specialized on geography, a licentiate degree from engineering sciences from the Santiago de Chile University, and a master's degree on political science from the Chilean Catholic University. Soledad Huerta also works at the coordinating office in Socioecological Just Transition at the Ministry of Environment, Chile. She collaborates on the articulation, deployment, and follow-up on the national strategy carrying the same name, and supports the management of public policies with a focus on the indigenous people, and he has a geography and degree and a PhD or a master's degree on governance policies, public policies, and territory. So you have the floor to present. I would like to thank you for this invitation. I believe that both for you and for us who have been immersed in this very relevant process, to be a part of these sessions is a privilege. Without further ado, we will start. Soledad will start, and then I will follow. And of course, we want to get to the Q&A as well so that we can answer questions. So please go ahead, Soledad. Thank you so much for the invitation. Please let me know if I am correct with the slides. Thank you. I will present the Chilean experience on the deployment and implementation from even before the socio-ecological just transition, the elaboration process and execution. I'm sorry, my cat is on my screen, and I will present this strategy for just socio-ecological transition. Yes, we are very pro-cat people at the Just Transition community, so don't worry about the cat. Going into our context or background, in our country, we have at least five areas in this category, as we call the sacrifice areas, according to the literature. These five highly industrialized areas established in the 50s, and they have been strategic for the economic development of our country. They have been strategic in the generation of energy and other areas in the economy, such as the mining industry, etc. From north to south, we have two areas, Tocopilla and Mejillones, that are transition territories as of Gabriel Boric's administrations. From north to south, we have other three areas, the Huasco district in the Atacama region, the Quintero, Puchón, Cabí districts in the 5th region, which is the Valparaíso region, and in the central southern region, the Coronel district, where apart from all of the activities that I've mentioned, there is a port, a very important port for the development and trade of our country. And this is what we call the transition territories agenda, in general terms, of course. In our country, just transition and social economic just transition started its development much before we called it as such. This was implemented with the environmental and social recovery of these environmentally degraded territories. We started with the transition and the socio-ecological just transition agenda with the installment of 3 territorial governances for social and environmental recovery. And As such, they start to articulate with energy sector just transition, and also became aligned with Chile's climate commitments under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So these two work streams, on one hand, environmental and social recovery, and on the other hand, energy transition, take the form of social ecological just transition. For context also, I can provide, for example, the reconversion and voluntary withdrawal of carbon units, the 2020 NDCs, which also becomes a social pillar for just and sustainable development. The climate strategy in the long run became implemented and implemented the NDC climate agreements and commitments. And also this is linked to just transition in the energy sector. As of 2022, Chile starts the creation of the institutionalization of this process with an interministerial social ecological transition committee with the engagement of 9 ministries, ranging from the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Women, up to energy and economy ministries. In 2022, Chile incorporates within the NDC strengthened for the first time a social ecological just transition concept, and also commits to the elaboration of a social ecological just transition national strategy as part of our commitment to comply with SDGs and in order to advance towards 2030 agenda. This is published in May 2024. This is the local plan for the Tocopilla social ecological just transition, which is located in the northern region in our country, as I showed you in the map. And last but not least, we started to implement the formally implement the social ecological just transition strategy as of 2024 with an environmental strategy assessment together with the Ministry of Environment and the 9 ministries that were part of the transition committee, as well as the ministries that were part of the just hydric transition program. So to date, we are drafting the first report on our action plan, which is an implementation tool with medium and long-term actions that is part of the socio-ecological just transition national strategy. This strategy was a commitment of the government of Boric's administration, and as I said, we worked with 9 ministries and 6 ministries in the transition committee and other ministries and services. We have defined the socio-ecological transition as a process of transformation and/or adaptation of social-cultural systems towards ecosystem balance, well-being of people, and sustainable production models within the framework of the triple crisis due to loss of biodiversity, climate change, and pollution. This strategy was based on articulation and dialogue, and of course, the engagement of the public sector and the unions were key, as well as territorial movements and organizations and academia. We had a panel of experts that not only came from academia, but also representatives from the transition territories, the unions, environmental organizations, and social organizations. and international organizations such as the International Labor Organization and the United Nations Program for Development. The strategy, as I said at the beginning, is part of the social just transition pillar with an implementation horizon of 10 years. In 2025, we incorporate a socio-ecological just transition, also includes commitments and contributions that relate employment, climate action, and climate change based on 5 principles such as sustainable productive development, decent jobs, ecosystemic focus, and is based on the principle of gender equality and respect for human rights. It is articulated with other public policies within production transformation, and it also aligns with Chile's climate commitments. It was organized in 4 pillars: opportunities for decent job, restoring and safeguarding of ecosystems, social well-being and gender equality, and innovation and technology for sustainable productive development. And this also includes guidelines, key areas and goals within an action plan that has 101 sectorial and intersectorial guidelines, including programs, policies, legislative initiatives, and also specific projects for the 5 transition territories, and they're also of national scope. The strategy, as I pointed out earlier, was led by a Socioecological Interministerial Just Transition Committee, and also with the incorporation of other ministries like Ministry of Interior in a political role, the Housing and Urbanism Ministry, and the Transportation and Telecommunications Ministry. It also has a regional and a local scope, and it articulates with the territorial governance that dates to an earlier era in our country. Regarding institutional sustainability of the socio-ecological transition agenda, well, first, an interministerial committee that has been strengthened, where our nation's president has recently stated and signed an executive order that updates and improves governance, and it's being implemented by our general control office, and also the office where I and Fernando work, which is the technical secretariat for this Socioecological Transition Committee. And we also have alliances with the workers' unions in Chile, and also there's a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with the Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Change from Spain, and also the initiative for Chile to be an accelerator for just transition at a global scale. We have also signed different agreements for governance in the different territories, such as Tocopilla, Mejillones, Huasco, Quintero, and Coronel. These agreements have been signed between the Ministry of Environment and other ministries, together with civil society authorities, unions, academia, and the private sector. I will summarize this slide, because if not, we don't have enough time. I would just like to say that for the action plan, well, the strategy was approved in May 2025 by the Council of Ministries for Sustainability and Climate Change, and to December 2025, we already have 1 follow-up report for the action plan with 64 guidelines that were planned to be implemented in 2025. And out of all of them, 65% have already been implemented, 17% have been finalized, that is to say, the goals were achieved, and 13% have been rescheduled to be implemented in 2026 due to budget cycle restrictions, and there's only 5% that have not been implemented yet, and this 5% requires higher dedication to understand the reasons why they haven't been implemented yet. We will leave this so that you can read it later on. There's something very positive here that will allow us to reenact some environmental liabilities that are located in Quintero, Pachuca. And with this, I will now give the floor to Fernando. So we will skip this part so that we can get to the learning part of our presentation. So please go ahead. This is an aspect that we also need to consider, and it's part of the strategies, process innovations. Two committees were created, the Interministerial Committee and the Water Interministerial Just Transition Committee. We merged both committees. The important thing here is that as for our transition focus and the strategic nature of everything related to the use of hydric and water resources in Chile, and also because this is related to socio-ecological transition and the need to have a hydric transition as well. That is why we merged both committees, and we also implemented a hydric Just Transition program with the support of the World Bank. So please go ahead. We also carried out some national events. We have some districts in transition, but we also held some international seminars related to just transition and also related to the concept of nature-based solutions for water security. We also have the agreement that Soledad mentioned with the Spain Ecologic and Demographic Challenge Agreement for Just Transition. And also I would like to talk about our agreement with the Central Union in Chile, because this allows us to go forward with the transition process. Then we have our engagement and participation at COP30, at the Chilean stand, and also a side event, and also at the Spain pavilion or stand. We also collaborated there. So it was very fruitful and very active engagement at COP30. Please go ahead. Also some publications. We have two very important ones, and we've generated a lot of information, and all of the reports, which are of course public, contain a lot of individual reports which are very relevant to understand just transition in Chile, and also the socio-ecological just transition national strategy, and also a technical document that explains the technical aspects on how we elaborated and implemented just transition in Chile. Please go ahead. Yes. And this is our last slide that summarizes some of our learnings. The first one, which we want to talk about, has to do with the relevance and broadness of this socio-ecological just transition concept. As all of the international documents say, based on different views, and each one of them has to do with each country's realities. And we reach this concept not only through the understanding of the fact that socio-ecological crisis at a global level requires a viewpoint that takes into consideration the different crises, but also based on our own experience in our own territories. An easy way to address it is that the territories that we consider under transition and that have social and environmental recovery programs, or the sacrifice areas, as we call them, it's not just a process to address the decarbonization process, because this didn't ensure that we would correct imbalances, social and environmental imbalances. And we also understood that a just energy transition concept was not enough to address transition. And also the pertinence and broadness of this concept includes global crisis. And we think that it's more complete. And it also allows us to address future perspective of actions, but also considering the past based on the acknowledgement of environmental liabilities and the debt we have with our communities and the workers who are part of transition.
A second important learning, particularly in times of questioning to the climate change fundamentals, for instance, and which may have an impact on the institutionality, the fact that the strategy becomes an international commitment, because this is the social pillar. And this is an element that in Chile has a feature of continuity. So the previous government established this as a commitment for energy transition. So the fact that this is part of an international instrument, in the case of Chile, when international commitments are very important for public policy relevance, this is key. Another element is the need that the socio-ecological transition is addressed from the bottom to the top. So in the Chilean experience, as Soledad said, this is before the social recovery and environmental recovery programs that started with the creation of the Ministry of the Environment, without participation of local governments, without participation of civil society, and without the participation of the companies. It is very difficult to give legitimacy to the actions of the state, but also to the actions of society as a whole, in order to move forward in transition, because the importance and the size of the problems require an effort that must group and must engage all stakeholders. So the role of the state is the only actor that is in a condition to generate political guidelines, to coordinate, and to provide funding. The state must fulfill a very important role. And in Chile, this role has been very relevant from the very beginning. As Soledad said, we have an executive order already to start creating governance of this role. And the fifth point, this is a sensitive aspect, the baseline financing. In Chile, we require a baseline financing so that the perspective and approach of transition can be mainstream, can be put in place. So we require a well-funded and well-financed team that can truly promote policies that must be considered through a mainstream perspective. Even though the state needs a minimum budget in order to address the social and environmental challenges, we also require a baseline financing, a baseline budget that can be used to create a transition office with professionals with the necessary tools. And of course, the cross-sector national and international collaboration is essential. A strategy, a national strategy, needs to consider this type of collaboration. We had a good discussion. We had national collaboration, but also international collaboration. We also want to thank for the efforts and the invitation of Cannes, by the way. And finally, all these processes require a sort of agreement and consensus from the institutional perspective. And at the end of the day, this must be translated into a piece of legislation. In the case of Chile, whenever we talk about conventions, they are taken with a legislative perspective. But then there are other commitments that do not have a legal force. And this is something that we need to consider. A just transition can be assured as long as there is a piece of legislation in place that protects it. Well, these were all the points that I wanted to share with you of our main lessons learned. So I will be here, we will be here at your disposal to continue the conversation. Thank you, Fernando and Soledad, for this presentation. There are so many interesting points, and probably where colleagues are going to ask questions. But in relation to many topics that we've been discussing all through this week, this idea that the transition doesn't take place on a blank sheet. I mean, many elements are part of the strategy. The strategy combines lots of stories, lots of elements, ecosystems, communities, territories, the issue of institutionality, as you said, the continuity of the public policies thanks to a piece of legislation, and then the role of social actors, not just to contribute to the strategy, but also to sustain the strategy along the time. And then there are financing issues that must be considered, many interesting topics based on a question that we always ask to our experts. How do you see from the situation in Chile, how do you think that an organized mechanism at global level could contribute to the efforts that you are making now, but how could a global mechanism could have helped you when you started your just transition? I also open the floor to Maggie, to Cami, if you want to uh, drop a question now. Yes, Maggie. Well, thank you for your presentation, first of all. Yesterday, I was lucky enough to participate in the presentation made by Spain. So I see this connection between the importance of cooperation among states and public policies under the framework of a global mechanism. What can the states offer in lessons learned, and how could a global mechanism improve the interstate collaboration to advance public policies? at territorial level and considering the needs of the states. Of course, there are many aspects to that, but maybe we can build on the lessons learned from, well, Chile, of course, Spain as well, and other individual cases. Cami, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentations. It's, I mean, always very, very useful to listen to your perspectives, what happens at the government spheres. I have a question related to how do you think, like Maggie and Annabella sort of said, how do you think that the mechanism can contribute in countries like Chile and the region as well? We are from Argentina, for example. How can this mechanism contribute to many topics: social problems, inequalities, climate vulnerabilities, structural inequalities, so on and so forth? And then from the participation point of view, consultation processes, this cooperation with civil society, trade union movements, youth movements. I was thinking, do you see some sort of articulation in these processes? The Escazú agreement, for example, that's an example that we can take. So information is always a crucial pillar, not just for decision makers, but also for people who want to engage in this process and they don't know how. So do you see some sort of synergies between the mechanism and the, for instance, Escazú mechanism, Escazú agreement in particular, or other agreements? Okay, let me start. And also Soledad can later on give her perspective. Of course, any global mechanism would have helped us at the very beginning. I believe that even though, well, this strategy started in Chile, and at that moment when it started, it would have been very, very convenient to have a global mechanism, not just for the guidelines and guidance of the government at that time, but also there is an important component that could have been of use for the other sectors of society, the other stakeholders of society. Maybe it could have helped us in having a clear guidance as to what is the relationship of the state with the international commitments, and how could we develop such a complex strategy, because this is a public policy that, for being cross-sector, has many points of implementation with many definitions as part of the state. I don't want to say vertical, but also this type of strategy requires a permanent vertical dialogue, horizontal and vertical. So in Chile, and based on the experience of the same transition in other countries, I believe that it would have been of very much use to have had a mechanism, a global mechanism. And then all countries go through situations where budgets and budget cuts of the, let's say, fiscal spending, well, this is always subject to the economy's ups and downs. So any mechanism that could ensure certain processes in this path to transition could be very relevant. There are countries where there's no funding at all of these resources to promote transition. So if there was or there is a clear funding, the situation would be different. That's why we say that transition is a space where certain approaches may converge, but at the same time, many intentions also converge. So where will the priority be placed? And a clear example of this approach is that for certain sectors and certain groups, the main approach was the just energy transition. And we decided to expand the approach to go to other dimensions as well, to cover other sectors and dimensions. So that meant assuming more commitments and more challenges than the political decision makers or authorities may want. So let me add, before making a pause, I think it was Camila who made reference to structural inequalities. And before moving to the synergies and the agreement of ASCASU, one of the main inequalities that we identify in transition processes is this power symmetry between the state that has its competencies, its political power, financing mechanisms, that has a capacity to relate to civil society and companies. The other actor is represented by the companies that also have their own interest and intention. They are part of the institutional discussion spaces, but companies and corporations are always very strong in decision-making processes. They have an impact on the state decisions. And finally, there's a civil society and the communities that live the impact of the transition. So the symmetry of these three stakeholders could be approached or addressed by a global mechanism, because at the end of the day, those who most need and request the transition are communities. In Chile, communities are the ones being impacted by pollution processes. Even after a decarbonization process may occur, and there are videos and documentaries, the Cocopilia case not long ago, but again, those are communities who have few resources, where there's not a good level of professionalism. The towns and villages are very small with small governments. So those symmetries that I mentioned should ideally be under a global mechanism so that we can have an effective transition. Otherwise, the transition is just uh, for a short time, is short-lived, not deep enough, and not fulfilling its purpose. And finally, the articulation with information processes. I mean, the synergy with the Escazú agreement in Chile. The Ministry of the Environment has um, has implemented this agreement. And I admit that in Chile, we do have some engagement standards. I don't know whether those standards are high or low, but I believe they are quite decent. We have some sort of protection mechanisms. We have some sort of, I mean, any person in Chile does not even need to identify themselves to request information through different mechanisms and channels. So, well, we do enjoy some sort of um, let's say, standard, decent standard. Now, the important thing should be that the state can have an active role in creating and generating useful information. So not just providing information, but making sure that the communities truly understand what is going on in their territories. And that doesn't happen. So as I said before, we do have information available. Anybody may request information. We follow a mechanism, but most or a great part of the community is not truly aware of what is going on in their territories. And this is very serious because there is an impact on the ability of social organizations to legitimize the processes and weakens the importance of this process, of these processes in the communities. So that is something that in the long run is translated into resources. Resources are key so that the entire community can become aware of what is going on in their territories so that they can also engage. Thank you, Fernando. Soledad, what are your thoughts? I will start with Escazú agreement and the connection with other agreements and other agendas. Let me tell you that the just socio-ecological transition has commitments, for instance, the active participation in Escazú, including the work agenda with the local governments. And also, there's another point that even though was not declared as a commitment per se, it has been part of the topics promoted by the transition agenda, which is that participating does not only require opportunities, formal institutionalized spaces, regulated spaces where communities and social movements can participate in environmental decisions, but at least as far as Escazú agreement is concerned, it's important to have capabilities and capacities to participate. And that is something that our transition office has promoted as best as it could, considering its human and budget limitations. But we have tried to promote access to training sessions, access to education sessions, so that people can have the capacities to participate and make decisions. Not to mention the efforts made by made by the people who are part of these territorial governments. The efforts to be trained, to be educated, and sometimes they are even more informed than ourselves about certain situations or events that take place in their own communities. And in addition to this question as to how could a mechanism contribute to this process, in relation to what Fernando said, it would not only be a collaboration in technical assistance or certain contributions to, for instance, monitor or track actions, so on and so forth, but A mechanism could also collaborate in sustaining the transition agenda, making it sustainable. We know that we are going through a time when energy transformation and transformation in general, low emission economies are no longer a priority on the international agendas. So a just transition mechanism could help us putting this at the center. So there is a global and commercial crisis, political, geopolitical crisis, but that should not stop us from thinking about the climate crisis. All those important matters do not stop temperatures from rising. So that's also a good point. We need to put the importance of low emissions back on the center. And another problem that a just transition addresses all over the world, this was mentioned by you on the document of BAM, in sort of put this idea of only focusing on carbon zero emissions. And they forgot agriculture, cities, transportation and mobility. So again, just transition should be considered as an umbrella problem or an umbrella approach. A mechanism could well collaborate in sustaining the current development agenda in these times of crisis. Thank you, Soledad, and your reflection is absolutely important. This idea of making it sustainable, making it continuous, an agenda that is fully aligned with social needs, economic needs, prosperity for the communities, the countries. And so clearly, several colleagues and experts who have been with us this week agree on this idea that every local transition is also a global transition. Nobody is an island. So in order to address many of the problems faced in the territories, we need to connect to global problems. We need to connect to global supply chains, the barriers, and there are, of course, some global questions, but also some local aspects that must be addressed as well. Fernando talked about the need that the mechanism should give legitimacy and space to communities. We need to find a way to voice the communities, to make a legitimate voice of the communities beyond the legitimate role of the states. And also the importance of not just working on information, but also on informed consent. How can we gain resources, but also ensure capacities so that social movements, unions, and social actors can work on actionable information so that they are fully part of the dialogue with public authorities. The presentation was very interesting, and I am sure that everybody will identify many aspects. We are all very interested in understanding what Chile is doing, and we are confident that these processes should continue. You do have the experience, and you also have a good projection to share with everybody. We understand that the communities that you are working with are also very much expectant and hopeful of what could come in the future on our side. We are going to keep in contact to follow the events in Chile in this just transition moment. Thank you, Soledad. Thank you, Fernando. Now we are going to conclude the live broadcast, and we are going to start another broadcast on the CAN YouTube channel about the financing laboratory of Just Transition. So now we are going to stop the live stream. Thank you.